came to him in it and asked him to read. The prophet replied, "I do not know how to read." The angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore. He then released me and asked me to read. And I replied, "I do not know how to read." Whereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time until I could not bear it anymore. Then he released me and asked me again to read. But again I replied, "I do not know how to read." Or, "What shall I read?" Thereupon he caught me for the third time and pressed me and then released me and said, "Read, in the name of your Lord, who has created all that exists. He has created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is most generous, up to that which he knew not." Then Muhammad returned with the inspiration, his neck muscles twitching with terror, till he entered upon Khadijah and said, "Cover me, cover me." They covered him till his fear was over. And then he said, "O Khadijah, what is wrong with me?" Then he told her everything that had happened and said, "I fear that something may happen to me." Khadijah said, "Never, but have the glad tidings, for by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you, as you keep good relations with your kin and kith. Speak the truth, help the poor and the destitute, serve your guests generously, and assist the deserving, calamity-afflicted ones." Khadijah then accompanied him to her cousin Waraqah bin Nawfal bin Asad bin Abdul Uzza, long name, who during the pre-Islamic period became a Christian and used to write the writing with Hebrew letters. He would write from the gospel in Hebrew as much as Allah wished him to write. He was an old man and had lost his weight. Khadijah said to Waraqah, "Listen to the story of your nephew, O my cousin." Waraqah said, "O my nephew, what have you seen?" Allah's apostle described whatever he had seen. Waraqah said, "This is the same one who keeps the secrets, Angel Gabriel, whom Allah has sent to Moses. I wish I were young and could live up to the time where your people would turn you out." Muhammad asked, "Will they drive me out?" Waraqah replied in the affirmative and said, "Anyone, man, who came with something similar to what you have brought was treated with hostility. And if I should remain alive till the day when you will be turned out, then I would support you strongly." But after a few days, Waraqah died, and the divine inspiration was also paused for a while. And the prophet became so sad, as we have heard, that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains. And every time he went up to the top of a mountain in order to throw himself down, Gabriel would appear before him and say, "O Muhammad, you are indeed Allah's apostle in truth." Whereupon his heart will become quiet and he will calm down and will return home. And whenever the period of the calming of the inspiration used to become long, he would do as before. But when he used to reach the top of a mountain, Gabriel would appear before him and say to him what he has said before. There are a number of slight variations to this story, related by different people, describing Muhammad's visitation by a spirit, identifying himself as the angel Gabriel. These stories do not always agree with each other in perfect detail, but on the whole, a complete picture can be drawn of Muhammad's initial experience with the spirit and his reactions after. And that's what I just presented. From this encounter, Muslims believe that Allah, through the archangel Gabriel, gave the collection of revelations to Muhammad that are now preferred as the Islamic scriptures.
Shalom, shalom, and peace and blessings, family. As always, at the 10-minute mark, we're going to say the Lord's Prayer. So bow with me as we say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, honored be thy name. May thy kingdom come, and thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us on a righteous path, and guard us from the evil. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen, amen. Shalom, shalom, family. So I wanted to have a very deep conversation today about. So on my page, I have some on my the front of my page. There's a talk of a prophecy. It's very deep, it's very historic, it's very accurate. Now I'm going to show the accuracy of this prophecy by going over history. Now, what I'm going to go to is actually the book of Flavius Josephus. It's going to be the Antiquities, the Jewish Antiquities, and it's going to be chapter 6. Now, I'm not the best reader, so I'm actually going to play a audio. Actually, in the description of this video, I'll have 3 notes, and I'm going to go over those notes today and talk about some very interesting historical points with the biblical narrative and understanding of what's going on in scene. So I'm gonna let something play, and this is gonna be. I'm gonna actually let it play, and I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna go through on the line for line where I'm at. I'm just gonna go and show you what is being said.
Chapter 6. How Nebuchadnezzar, when he had conquered the king of Egypt, made an expedition against the Jews, and slew Jehoiakim, and made Jehoiakim his son king. Now in the 4th year of the reign of Jehoiakim, one whose name was Nebuchadnezzar took the government over the Babylonians, who at the same time went up with a great army to the city Carchemish, which was at Euphrates, upon a resolution he had taken to fight with Necho king of Egypt, under whom all Syria then was. And when Necho understood the intention of the king of Babylon, and that this expedition was made against him, he did not despise his attempt, but made haste, with a great band of men, to Euphrates to defend himself from Nebuchadnezzar. And when they had joined battle, he was beaten, and lost many 10,000s of his soldiers in the battle. So the king of Babylon passed over Euphrates, and took all Syria, as far as Pelusium, excepting Judea. But when Nebuchadnezzar had already reigned 4 years, which was the 8th of Jehoiakim's government over the Hebrews, the king of Babylon made an expedition with mighty forces against the Jews, and required tribute of Jehoiakim, and threatened upon his refusal to make war against him. He was affrighted at his threatening, and bought his peace with money, and brought the tribute he was ordered to bring for 3 years. But on the 3rd year, upon hearing that the king of the Babylonians made an expedition against the Egyptians, he did not pay his tribute. Yet was he disappointed of his hope, for the Egyptians durst not fight at this time. And indeed the prophet Jeremiah foretold every day how vainly they relied on their hopes from Egypt, and how the city would be overthrown by the king of Babylon, and Jehoiakim the king would be subdued by him. But what he thus spake proved to be of no advantage to them, because there were none that should escape, for both the multitude and the rulers, when they heard him, had no concern about what they heard, but being displeased at what was said, as if the prophet were a diviner against the king, they accused Jeremiah, and bringing him before the court, they required that a sentence and a punishment might be given against him.
All right. All right. So already you should already know what we're talking about. So this is actually a historical document, a first century historical document recording, because remember, all the kings were recorded by multiple kings around them, especially when we think about Nebuchadnezzar and things like that, for example. I'm going to show you right now what is called the Babylonian Tablet. Now, this tablet, I'm going to actually copy it and actually show the original one. You can find it in the British Library. It shouldn't be too hard to find. You can see it's talked about in different places and everything. Here it is, the British Library. So this is going to be a real tablet. It talks about this king. It talks about what happened to this king and everything that happened there. I'm going to show you basically what they talk about on there. And I'm going to show you the exact timing of these things. So this is what it says. It says in the 7th month of Nebuchadnezzar. This is actually going to be very important. What's going to be talking about here. In fact, let me go over here and do it off of what we just read so that we are not going too fast. Let me go right here. So let's note the time frame where we need to look at. So now we got to note that this is going to be the 4th year of Jehoiakim, right? That's very important. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can find the exact times of the kings. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's death, we know the time of his death and everything, and we know what happens. But I'm gonna point you to something, and I'm gonna show you how the exact time is right. So first, we gotta note when's Jehoiakim's 4th year, right? So let's just make sure we're talking about Jehoiakim. Yep, the reign 4th year. And I'm gonna go over here. And we just had the battle of where Egypt and Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon fought. That was called the Battle of Carchemish. And that battle had took place very early. You can see it's mentioned in Jeremiah 36, 1-2. And it came to pass in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, right? The righteous king Josiah, the one who made the great Passover, king of Judah, that this word came unto Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, take thee a roll. Now, this is what happened. This is what we just read, is that Jeremiah was being persecuted by the king because he took that roll and he wrote on all the words from, if you see from Jeremiah, it was a long prophecy. If you read Jeremiah, it's like a long prophecy. And then all of a sudden, finally, the prophecy is being handed to the king. And that's what the reading was just talking about, that at that moment of time, that's when Jeremiah left, but the warning was sent to Jehoiakim. This warning was very important. This warning was very important because this warning was a warning that when Yah was going to send Babylon to them, when he was going to send Nebuchadnezzar to them, soon as he was to go to them, he would turn his face from them. But let's read a little bit more. You can see in Jeremiah 25, 1-3, it says, now what's important about this is to understand that this had happened again later on with Messiah. He points out in Luke 21 and 24, he says they shall fall by the edge of the sword and they shall go into captivity. And even as in the part of Acts 1 and 6 and 7, is the time now for Israel to be gathered? And he said, not yet. So Israel's still waiting to be gathered. That's very important. But we're talking about a time. This is very important. It is a time of a long time ago that it is, what's the word, the best way to describe it? It's like the 6th seal. It represents an ancient day of the Lord. That's what this was. And we're going to talk about that when we start going to pinpoint in Jeremiah 4. But first, let's continue reading to get the pinpoint, because I believe setting, time frame, these are very important. We can see here in Jeremiah 25, 1-3, it says, the word came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, right? And notice what year of Nebuchadnezzar that is. That's very important because we know about this war that happened at a certain time frame is going to give us some pinpoints in years. It says that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, right? Nebuchadnezzar was made king after the battle of Carchemish. It's very important to see some of the historical writings of that battle. For example, Isaac Newton, he talks about that using what is called ascension regnal years. It's just counting the year of a regnal, or a year of a king. For example, when a king gets on the throne in ancient times, you would count the first day as soon as they get on the throne. You wouldn't like, for example, when you have a kid nowadays, usually people count their 1 year after their coming, birthday, their date of birth, right? As soon as that come around, they say 1 year old. Another time around, they say 2. With a king, is not like that. They don't have a year 0. As soon as they get on the throne, they're a king. That's very important because it talks about basically his beginning of his reign is very important to understand for understanding prophecy. right? So right here, it lets us know at when we're talking regnal years, we're talking that first year. The best way to explain that is I should use a timeline just to show that, just for the sake of that. All right, so let's say a king starts in the year 1000 BC, right? 1000 BC would be his regnal year. But remember, BC goes this way, so it's counting down. So 1000, and then it's going to be 999 BC throughout his reign, right? And then 999 at the end of it will be basically 2 years. I know that sounds weird, but the start at 1000 would be counted as 1 year, and 1 year passing, instead of saying 1 year is old, you'll say 2 years. So just think about that while we go over this. So as we go over this, it's important to know when the king of Nebuchadnezzar got on the throne, that was the 4th year of Jehoiakim. So Nebuchadnezzar got there, Jehoiakim's 4th year. That's very important because we're going to get some events that's going to happen all the way up to what we just seen there, Daniel. We're going to get some events that's going to go up to the time of Daniel because Nebuchadnezzar took Jerusalem from Egypt. Egypt had power over Jerusalem at that time, but then the power transferred over to Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon. I want you to picture this, that you're in a time, because we're going to get really pinpoint. It's all about Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin. We're going to start talking about them. If you're not familiar with who they are, I'm going to turn the sound off on it though. But I made an animation. I'm actually revoicing. I'm revoicing and redoing a few things on it. But I made an animation. I make animations sometimes. I haven't made any recently, but I'm going to make one coming up. But this is where I talk really detailed about those kings. And what's important to understand when we talk about these certain kings like Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin, I'm just going to go to this part. It's very important to understand that they're very close. The father-son relationship is very close with them. When I say close, it's important to understand that Jehoiachin, when he was 8 years old, he reigned 10 years with Jehoiakim. Like he was reigned side by side with him for 10 years on his throne. But his official final point of reign, which is very important, his official final point of reign is actually going to be when he's 18 years old. And that's when we get the moment where he rules for 3 months, only 3 months. But we're going to look at that when we get to the history of it. So let's keep on going and dive in a little deeper and deeper. So note what we just found out. That's going to be Nebuchadnezzar's first year. And it also let us know it's the 13th year from Josiah. Now, that is also done in this math in itself to know when is his 13th year. We can look at some of those things when it comes to his age and everything, but I want to pinpoint on Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin. The reason why is because it has to do with a very important prophecy. So I just want to show you that when we look at these time frame, these years, the biblical narrative agrees with history, and we're going to look at the history as well as we go over these things. So talking about Jehoiakim, we already seen that we're looking at his 4th year. Now I'm going to go over here and we're going to look at something because it goes down and it talks about something else. Now, you're going to see it start to talk about what happened in Daniel. Now, what's important about what happened in Daniel, it starts to take off around the 8th year of Jehoiakim. You can see right here, it says, but when Nebuchadnezzar had already reigned 4 years, so it's going to be, his first year, now it's going to be his 4th year. It says, which was the 8th year of Jehoiakim's government over the Hebrews, right? Because remember, he was set up there by pretty much the king renamed and everything, but he was set there. And he's basically reigning over Jerusalem. And what's important about it is this time frame. So let's go to the 8th year of his reign. Now we're going to go to his 8th year of his reign. So Jehoiakim, down here, right here. So now we got his 8th year. So this is going to be his 8th year of his reign. Now this is very important because in the 8th year of his reign, we're going to get a pinpoint of what's going on here. So we get in 2 Kings 24:1. It says, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Okay. So now we're going to get a point where we see Nebuchadnezzar is there, and now we're going to get the people of the land, they're now serving under Babylon. Now, this is also prophecy because remember, it was said that they had to be under Babylon. It was the punishment of the sins that were happening there. So the start point, if we see here, remember, counting regnal years, the first one will be a regnal year, and this one will be a regular year because the direction of the year, remember, goes down. So the start point till the end of this point, that's going to be the year that we're looking at here. Now, obviously, just taking that point, because if we connect that also with the first, what we was talking about, the battle of Nebuchadnezzar's first year, because you can see here when we talk about what's going on there, when we talk about the regnal years and everything, it's very important when we're reading these things. The kings, they use a lot of those regnal years. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because Nebuchadnezzar's first year, as we can see here, this would be, I'm going to go up a little bit. Right here, you see where it says 606 BC. That's how we know that that time is right, because it's also mentioned about that time. It's actually important to understand when we look at this thing. This is actually going to be used in regnal years. This is going to be from, I'm going to click this. If you've never seen Isaac Newton made a book, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting book. He uses regnal years in his book. He talks about that when he's calculating the battles and things. So when you see this where it says 607 BC, that's the regnal year. And then it's actually going to be 606, which he also talks about in his book. So you can see right here, that would be the regnal year right there for the battle that we was talking about, which was Nebuchadnezzar's first year of reign. And also you can see right here, therefore Nebuchadnezzar's first regnal year was 606, because the battle of Carchemish, right after that battle, as we see right here, when he talks about the battle that happened in 607 BC, in 606 BC, that's when Nebuchadnezzar went into the throne and reigned. We also know that because we have other historical documents of different things, but we're going to get to that when I start getting closer to the siege. When we start getting closer to the siege, we're going to look at more historical documents. So just to confirm those dates, it's very important to know these are very historical and very important events that happen in real life. This is very important. So now, what do we already know? We know that from the time, now we have to remember, when did Jehoiakim become a servant? In the 8th year. So 603 is the regnal year. 602 is the actual year. Now in 602, he became a servant. So 3 years, right? What's 3 years from that? We're going to get 599 BC. So the last year is Jehoiakim reigned for 11 years. And his last regnal year will be 606 BC. But in 599 BC, he met his end. That's very important. So remember, regnal year is because 606 BC came, and throughout 599, as the year progresses, that's still counted as the same year. You see what I'm saying there? So that's still kind of the same king year. So 599 BC, we're going to look at events in 599 BC. That's very important. 599 BC has some very major events because that's going to be where we get this prophecy that's going to be pointed to that season. Very, very, very important because it spreads out. But I want to show you the details of the biblical narrative with history, how detailed the biblical narrative is with history, because this is a real battle that many actually know. But you got to be careful with some of the datings. A lot of times, if you search on Google, I always talk about this. Be careful when searching on Google, because Google, a lot of times they can be off. Like I said it before, look up when did Rome fall, right? When did Rome fall? And you'll find that they'll try to say, like, for example, I'll just try it down. Let's see if they put the right one. When did Rome fall? So this is just one of the questions out of many questions. You see right there, is that when Rome fell? No. That's when the western part of Rome fell. But Rome actually in 330 AD moved its capital to Constantinople, and that actually was taken down by the Ottomans in about 1453 AD. So you got to be careful when looking up things. For example, also, when was the dome, was just dome of the rock built? Right? When was the Dome of the Rock built? So a lot of times you gotta be careful, especially when using Wikipedia. You see how it says 691 to 692. You gotta be careful because there is a recording of a historical war, that when you take into account history, you gotta take into account what also is around those events. Don't just look for that event, but look for other events around that event. For example, there was a war that had happened. I'm gonna be referring to a book right here. I'm just gonna click it right here for exact dating for certain things. I'm gonna go to this when I get to this point. I don't want to move too fast, but I'm gonna go to this when I get to this point. You got to be careful when looking at stuff because they'll let you know solidly that a certain war took place, a certain person had died at that season, and they know that in 692, which is recorded by other historians of that time, that in that season, that's when they built the dome. So it couldn't be 691 because of the certain siege that took place. It was in 692 AD. And that's very important to note. The reason why a lot of times when you see dates like that, you got to be careful when looking at those sources. So be careful when you're looking on the internet like that, but actually look at the historical sources and also look at the details because this is actually a very detailed part of Scripture. This is a very, very detailed part of Scripture. So let's keep on looking here and see why this is important. The reason why this is important because Daniel has a prophecy. Very important to understand about the prophecy because sometimes we can get individuals that wrestle with the scriptures, kind of like what Paul was worrying about, not for individuals to wrestle with the scriptures because it can be cause to their own destruction. But if we go up across scripture carefully and fairly with others, because that's what Lion Farm is. Our channel is actually allow brothers and sisters of different backgrounds of obviously of believing the Most High, obviously, but we allow them to come and voice their opinion on things, like voice their opinion on this or that. We examine multiple different things. And one of the biggest things that we like to look at is prophecy. Prophecy, the depth of prophecy, the details of history with the biblical narrative is absolutely amazing. Sometimes genetics, it's not focusing on genetics, but we do look at genetics to get an idea on different peoples, different things like that, which, that's always going to be a topic at hand. So going a little more deeper into this time frame, let's look at this 599 BC. Now, the reason why this is important, because I really want you to really soak into what happens to Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin. What happens is going to be one of those things that you got to understand in the details of it. For example, in 599 BC, the reason and also how we know that this siege is going to take place at that time is because we got other scriptures that we can cross-reference to make sure that time is exactly right, that it's not anything different in history. So 599 BC is going to be the start of the siege. A couple of different references that we can look at. I'm going to go over here real fast. So let me actually close this, go over here. So we can actually look in different parts of Flavius Josephus' writings. So, like I said, he's a Judean, a Levi, known as a prophet because what he did with Tacticus and what happened. Well, Tacticus, Tiberius. I'm all twisted up with that. But the prophecy that he made with the Roman emperors, the Caesar at that time, he made a prophecy and it came to pass. And he was known as a prophet and he was set up, though he was actually a Judean. He was a Levite. And he wrote a book about history of the Jews. Now, on book 10, chapter 7, which is a little after what I'm playing here, it reads this. But in terror seized the king of Babylon, who had given the kingdom to Jehoiakim. So we're going to look at that. This is actually going to be talking about 599 BC. We're going to be looking at the detail here of what happened in 599 BC. But remember, Jehoiakim Jehoiakim, his father, was taken that same year. Jehoiakim only reigned 3 months. He only reigned 3 months, and this is going to all be in the same year. Both of these events happen in the exact same year, and that's important because there's going to be some important details we're going to talk about. But first, let's finish hearing a little more of this history and hearing the last bit of chapter 7.
Now all the rest gave their votes for his condemnation, but the elders refused, who prudently sent away the prophet from the court of the prison, and persuaded the rest to do Jeremiah no harm, for they said that he was not the only person who foretold what would come to the city, but that Micah signified the same before him, as well as many others, none of which suffered anything of the kings that then reigned, but were honored as the prophets of God. So they mollified the multitude with these words, and delivered Jeremiah from the punishment to which he was condemned. Now when this prophet had written all his prophecies, and the people were fasting and assembled at the temple, on the 9th month of the 5th year of Jehoiakim, he read the book he had composed of his predictions of what was to befall the city and the temple and the multitude. And when the rulers heard of it, they took the book from him, and bid him and Baruch the scribe to go their ways, lest they should be discovered by one or other. But they carried the book and gave it to the king. So he gave order in the presence of his friends that his scribe should take it and read it. When the king heard what it contained, he was angry and tore it and cast it into the fire, where it was consumed. He also commanded that they should seek for Jeremiah and Baruch the scribe, and bring them to him, that they might be punished. However, they escaped his anger.
All right, so if you know what this is, what we're reading here, I put a timestamp on here. What we're actually reading there is actually very important. This is actually going to be from Jeremiah. This is actually going to be from Jeremiah. Just going to note, we can see right here from this timestamp, this is what we just read. In Jeremiah 22:7, it says, I will prepare destroyers against you, everyone with his weapons. They shall cut down your choice cedars and cast them into the fire. Now, this is actually prophesied. This is prophesied to the king. When he got the letter, he read this, he cut the letter up and cast it into the fire. Think about that. It says, and many nations shall pass by this city, and they shall say, every man to his neighbor, why has the Lord done thus to this great city? You see what he's prophesying to him? He's prophesying that he's going to turn his face from the city. That's very important to understand that the whole prophecy, when you look at the whole prophecy, that's what we're going to look at, pinpoint Jeremiah 4, because I think that's going to be very important to understand what he's actually talking about that time. Is actually the day of the Lord. He referenced that day when he does that is the day that he does that. So obviously Jeremiah left, right? He fled away. It came to pass. You actually, when you had seen, he read it, right? Cut it up, cast it in the fire. That was just horrible, right? Gotta listen to the Most High. We can't do that. We can't just cut the words up, cast it away, and you know what happens, right? So, and then we're gonna note what happens here. So we're gonna note what happens here because what happens here is gonna tell us the events of what unfolds. What events unfold. So I'm just gonna read it. Obviously, we have read this a little bit. That at that time we're gonna get what happens after this event. So I'm gonna let it read a little more to see what happens there. Very deep.
Now a little time afterwards, the king of Babylon made an expedition against Jehoiakim, whom he received into the city, and this out of fear of the foregoing predictions of this prophet, as supposing he should suffer nothing that was terrible, because he neither shut the gates nor fought against him. Yet when he was come into the city, he did not observe the covenants he had made, but he slew such as were in the flower of their age, and such as were of the greatest dignity, together with their king Jehoiakim.
Hold on, this is very important. I want you to take note of what just happened here. Was there a siege? Was there a long siege? No. Jehoiakim, what's important about this, Jehoiakim actually left his doors open. Actually, I didn't even know this until I read this and I thought about it. I was like, yeah, that makes sense because it actually is said that he was giving tribute to him. Now, he rebelled against him, but it's actually said that when Nebuchadnezzar came there, he basically brought, it's like he brought all the nations with him. And Nebuchadnezzar himself was enough. Babylon was enough itself because they took down Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, which is a historically documented pharaoh. It's important to understand that when Nebuchadnezzar was laying siege on Jerusalem, it wasn't at that time. That wasn't the siege. But he walked in and took Jehoiakim. Now, this is important. The reason why is because what happens to Jehoiakim and what happens with Jehoiachin. That's very important. Jehoiachin sees his father die. He actually sees his father die. Long story short, we can see right here. I'm just going to basically read the rest right here. It says, as we see at the bottom right here, now a little time afterwards, the king of Babylon made an expedition against Jehoiakim, right? Remember, he had opened the cities to him and thought that he would not suffer anything bad because he didn't close the gates to him and everything. Yet when he come into the city, he did not observe. Obviously, they made covenants and everything at that time. Like he said, I'm going to keep a peace. I'm covenant with you if you do this thing and everything. But he came in there, and as you can see, he's actually going to talk about, long story short, he throws Jehoiakim off of the walls. He commands to be thrown off the walls. So he takes Jehoiakim, throws him off the walls, and I guess he didn't have a burial. He wasn't even buried. And that's important because think about that. Just think about that. Jehoiachin, right? His son. He reigned with his father. It's very important to understand the biblical narrative actually tells us that he reigned jointly, which is not unheard of. We've seen this with many different kings that reign jointly with their son that sits on their same throne. That's even an example with Messiah and Yah, what he's actually illustrating there, making them both the same rulers, counted as one rule. Jehoiakim's whole reign, when he reigned, he actually reigned with his son Jehoiachin. And that was when Jehoiachin was 8 years old. And then by 18 years old, he seen Jehoiakim die. Now, what's important about that is put yourself in Jehoiachin's shoes. Just put yourself in his shoes for a second. You're a king of Judah. You're a son, direct son of David. You just seen this Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon take your father, a son of Judah, and cast him off of the walls. How much would you want to serve him? How much do you think that you want to serve this person that just took your father and cast him off the walls? And you got to think about that when you take in that these are all real individuals. There's in between characteristics that we don't see, but we can tell by what happened quickly. Within 3 months and 10 days, Jehoiachin rebelled. 3 months and 10 days. He stayed there and he rebelled. But the thing is, with Jehoiakim, that same year, what happened that same year was that siege. Now, I'm going to show you some other points for that siege. Not just what we see right here with Josephus, but we can get different examples. Like, for example, this is from a historian, a professor, what he writes here, which is going to also be in a note in the description in Ancient Histories, DM Masson, or Masson, how you say that? Masson. He actually writes about that event because that event is very important. If you read the book of Daniel has to do with the start of this event. The book of Daniel has to do with the start when this event starts taking off and it gets to its last point of it. That's what the book of Daniel circles around. A lot of the prophets, Daniel, Ezekiel, right, Jeremiah, these all circle around this major time frame event. But this is what it says. It says, in the room of Jehoiachin, you can see, obviously, it's switched out. He has switched them out. But let me go up a little before I go down there before we talk about that. Right here, So you can see it's written with Daniel when you see the records in Daniel and everything. In the same year that Daniel was rising high in favor at Babylon, because remember, Daniel was taken when Nebuchadnezzar took Jerusalem from Pharaoh Necho. So Daniel, and it wasn't a siege, it was a transfer of power. So at first, Egypt was over Jerusalem, and then the transfer of power was that we had basically, we got to understand that Babylon defeated Egypt and pushed them downwards and controlled a massive portion of that area. So it's very important to know that. And that's when Daniel was taken. And then a little later, that's when the siege happened. And now it's going to talk about the siege and saying, in the same year that Daniel was rising high in favor at Babylon, his royal kinsman Jehoiakim yielded to Egyptian influence. Now, this is important. This is talked about in the Bible that Jehoiakim said, basically, I'm going to turn to Egypt and we're going to basically work together and beat Babylon. But that didn't work out because as soon as Nebuchadnezzar heard that, he's the same Nebuchadnezzar that defeated Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish. He came and that's what happened. So, and he revolted. So Jehoiakim revolted. His career, however, was short. For about 2 years afterward, Nebuchadnezzar dispatched an army which subdued Egypt and revenged Judah and brought the rebel king in chains to Babylon. Here he was put to death, 599 BC. Now that's very important to understand. So he was taken, put to death in 599 BC because they would make a big example of him after an eventful and dishonorable reign of 11 years. His infant son, Jehoiachin, or you can see he has different ways to say his name, Johanan, how you say that? So after he says, after a nominal reign of 3 months. Now, the reason why that is, like I said, he was reigning jointly at first, but now he's reigning by himself for 3 months. Was also conveyed to Babylon by orders of Nebuchadnezzar. So obviously he himself was under Nebuchadnezzar, right? He being under Nebuchadnezzar. Jerusalem was again obviously rifled, right? Taken under because they was made subject to him, and a number of additional captives taken. Among them were Ezekiel the prophet. So this is very important. Remember, after 3 months they were taken, then that's when Ezekiel was taken, and a lot of the different ones that's spoken of, even you can see in Esther and everything, the individuals that's spoken there. So we know that in 599 BC was the time when Jehoiachin was taken off the throne. That's very important. A little more, we can see Oxford University. Oxford University also talks about this point of history. They get very pinpoint when getting on these points of history. It's actually important to understand that the Babylonian Tablet actually talks about 2 points. It talks about the start of Jehoiachin's siege, but the prophecy was to Jehoiakim. The note, the whole letter of the prophecy was to Jehoiakim, to the transfer of Jehoiachin. It's very important to understand. We're going to look at that very carefully. But the siege for Jehoiachin, it says in 599 BC, Nebuchadnezzar II invaded Judah and again laid siege to Jerusalem. In 598 BC, Jehoiakim died during the siege and was succeeded by his son Jehoiachin. Now, what's interesting about that, you got to be careful with this one. This is going to be what I'm actually taking this from. I'm going to show you what I just clicked real fast. You can see right here, you can see this right here, 597 BC. You'll start seeing things like that. When you start looking on, that's why I was showing you, if you use Google and all that stuff, be careful using Google when you're using that stuff. Be careful what you're using. Look at the source carefully, right? Because if you don't look at the source carefully, you may not find the exact answer. Because I seen where things would say from 598 to 597. That's, you got to be careful with that because that is actually going to be off. That's going to be actually off. So be careful with some of those things. Go to the books, to the actual books for a more clear look for those things. I'm going to go down and I'm going to show you something here. So the reason I want to show you some of these things because I want you to be careful also when you're going over these things. For example, you can see right here, Um, here's another one. Here's one that talks you can see it on different sites. You're going to have different pieces of information, but that's why I always go to books. So they talk about the same thing. They say, when did Jehoiakim die? When did Jehoiakim die based on the history? Jehoiakim died on the time that Jehoiachin became king. So that's very important. So he didn't die in 598. That's very important. Jehoiakim did not die in 598. But I wanted to show you that sometimes on Wiki posts, sometimes you'll see things like that. Be careful with things like that. Here's another one. I'm going to go down right here because I think this note is actually an older note. I'm going to grab a newer note of this note, but I'm going to still use this note as a reference. So right here is going to be Isaac Newton. You can see right here. Isaac Newton also talks about the same event, because when you're getting detailed with it, it has to do a lot with the Battle of Carchemish and things like that. When you're taking a war event or events that multiple nations record, that's when you're starting to get to pinpoints. And I'll also show you another way we know this is right by using the biblical narrative and when did Nebuchadnezzar die, which is going to give us that same year, 599 BC. So right here, you can see there upon the end of Jehoiakim's 11th year in the spring of 599 BC. So spring of 599 BC, Nebuchadnezzar captured Jehoiakim, right? And it says the son and successor of Jehoiakim. That's very important. So we're actually going to get and it's important to understand that he actually captured Jehoiakim, his son, that year. Few people actually know that he actually captured him that year, but he waited. He waited a year, as it talks about right here. He appointed Zedekiah as their king and bound him with an oath to serve the king of Babylon. This is also talked about in the scriptures, where it talks about Zedekiah, which originally name was Mattaniah, changed to Zedekiah, and he swore a agreement with Babylon to be under him. And we got that in the biblical narrative. That's very important. So continuing on with this, Jehoiakim's reign officially ended in the spring at the end of his 11th year, which we see in the biblical narrative. It talks about that before the month of Nisan. So remember, spring, Nisan. So before the new year came, this is why the other king didn't become king until the next year, because Nebuchadnezzar, at that moment of time, put Jehoiachin there. Now it's important to understand Regno King's years. The reason why I say Regno King's years, because if you look in the biblical narrative, you'll see that it will tell you that Jehoiakim reigned a year. I'm going to show you something real fast. It can be one of those things. Sometimes there's verses that can be, what's the word I'm looking for? They can make things kind of complex, but I'm going to grab one from an example here. And I think this one is one. Here's one. So 2 Chronicles 36, 9-2. It says Jehoiachin was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. And notice what it says in the next chapter, on the next verse. It says, and when the year was expired. Now, that's when some people trip up on. It's important to understand that it's talking about his king's year, and when the regnal year is the first day when the king is on the throne. So his 1 year reign is that 1 year reign, even though it's only 3 months, because a regnal year has no year zero. Ascension King's year is another way to put it. That's what this note basic would have some explanations to give what that is, what exactly is a ascension year or a regnal year, king year, or the year of the monarch, things like that they were using in the time of the biblical narrative. It's important to understand that be careful when you see that someone's reign was 1 year, but calculate exactly what the scripture is saying when it's talking about how old they are. So let me keep going. Let's keep on going. The reason why I want you to understand that real fast is because I want you to understand how pinpoint, how pinpoint these things are. I want you to understand how pinpoint these things are. But real fast, let me go down to something. Not on this, but here. You can see here, I'm gonna continue reading right here. So he appointed Zedekiah as their king and bound him with an oath, right, to serve the king of Babylon. And Jehoiakim's reign was officially ended in the spring at the end of the 11th year before the month Nisan, which started the Jewish New Year in 599 BC. So we get it right there. We get the exact time frame. We got that with Josephus. We got that right here with a calculation for Isaac Newton. It says right here, Zedekiah was not made the new king until shortly after the Jewish New Year. So 599 BC did not count as his first year. That's very important. Now, it's important to understand he's also counting regnal years here. So just to get an understanding of that, very important to understand what's going on there. So getting understanding on these things, when you're looking at these things, we're getting a little more of a pinpoint, a little more of a squeeze. This note right here, I'll have in the description, but I have a newer one of this with more meat on it. I'm gonna put that one in the description as well. But let's understand this. I'm gonna go to first Nebuchadnezzar's year, and then we're gonna get to the pinpoint by using another piece of the biblical narrative. So right here, Nebuchadnezzar, remember it let us know in his 8th year, 599 BC. It's important that we have all historical events line up with this all the way to his death, right? We got a recording of his death. I'm going to show you something with his death, how we know this exact time frame is right, even by knowing his death, the year of his death and things like that. Now, right here, Nebuchadnezzar's 8th year, we can see that was Jehoiakim. When he was taking everything, we have seen that event happen. That's 599 BC to 598. It's very important. But let's go down and understand, how do we know that 599 BC was the siege? Using the biblical narrative. If we had to use the biblical narrative to find that year, can we use the biblical narrative to only find that year? Yes. In the same book with Isaac Newton, real fast, you can see in Isaac Newton book, he also talks about a different king going on the reign, evil Murdoch. He goes and takes the position after the death of Nebuchadnezzar. So we know when Nebuchadnezzar dies and everything. Talks about when he died in the winter, 562 BC. Very important, because most people know this. When I say most people, when you see historians and things like that, they know that time frame is correct, because if you just look up Nebuchadnezzar's death, which I don't know if I have a picture here. Actually, yeah, right here. So the beginning of evil Murdoch's reign, because Babylonians, the way that their kings would reign, they would go one after another. So as soon as a king died, another king takes their place, right? So this king, he ruled 562, right? That's the start of his reign. Now we can note with Nebuchadnezzar, when did he die? So Nebuchadnezzar, not hard. When we look up when did Nebuchadnezzar die, 562 was when he died. So if we note the reason why I'm telling you that this is important, because this is what the biblical narrative tells us. Let me show you something. Just go to this right here. All right, so I'm going to show you how we know this in the biblical narrative. So it starts right here. So it's very important to understand these two scriptures. I'm going to start with this one. There's one in Kings and there's one here. Jeremiah 52 and 30. It came to pass in the 37th year, the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month. This is going to be very important, right? It's going to be Adar, February, March, about that time. In the 25th day of the month. So this is going to be very important. It's going to be 37 years after the captivity of Jehoiakim. It's very important what's going to say here. Evil Murdoch, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and brought him forth out of prison. Now that we know that evil Murdoch took the place of Nebuchadnezzar in 562, right? We got to understanding that in 562, and we can actually use a 80, not an 80 BC, but a 80 BC calendar is an ancient calendar that was used in the first century to find the exact time frame of those dates of 562. We don't necessarily need the exact day, but it does give exact days for that. For in two different parts of the scriptures, it gives us two different days on that. So this one is one, and then there's one in the Book of Kings that does that as well, right here. And it came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the, you can see right here, the, what's that, the 12th month. Yep, the 12th month, Adar, February, March. On the 7th and 20th day of the month, evil Murdoch, right, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, did lift up Jehoiachin, king of Judah, out of prison, right? So the day doesn't make difference. Just the reason why I'm showing you that is because one, you can see here, this one would have the 27th day right there. And then this one technically would have the 25th day. Doesn't make a difference, right? 2-day difference, right? From here to here gives us the same month, same year, and the same basic time. So even if we take that into consideration, which I did twice just for the sake, if we take the calculations, I like to use an 80 BC calculator. So 80, these are 80 BC calculators for calculating things from 80 to BC. But since it's only BC, it wasn't really hard, but I wanted to do it just for the clarity. So I want to show you something real fast. How do we know this date is exactly right? This is using the biblical narrative, not using any other extra source, just using the biblical narrative. So we know when Nebuchadnezzar died. We can actually find around the exact time. It's early spring, right? March, about that time. For the clarity, for the understanding, what's important is it tells us from that time is 37 years. Just to make sure you see that. From the time, this is what we're going to look at, from the time that Jehoiachin, the captivity of Jehoiachin, right? 37 years passed, and then it's evil Murdoch's beginning of his reign. All we have to do is from 562 BC, all we have to do is go back 37 years. Now I'm going to show you that. So 562, in between here, do we get 37 years from 599 BC? Yes. From 599 BC to the time of Nebuchadnezzar's death, we get exactly what the biblical narrative says when it says that was 37 years in between. So that's very important. So it lets us know what was in between those events. You can see right here, this is very important because some say that it's 598. That's very wrong. That's using 598, and sometimes you see they'll say 597. That's very wrong. You can be off a year, off 2 years. That's very important. So it's very important to understand what the biblical narrative is using. So you can see right here. So when I put here March 15th or March 13th, that's because when you're saying Adar, the 25th of Adar, or the Adar 27th, this is just what it's talking about here when you transfer it to what our Gregorian calendar what month it would be, right? Because Passover, you would say the first month of the Hebrew month, but it wouldn't be the first month of the Gregorian calendar. So you can see right here, from 599 BC and 562, right? Remember, it said 37 years. 37 years it was apart. So that's very important. That's very important. So 599 BC, we're going to have a very important event that happens. What happens in that time? 599 BC. 599 BC, we're going to have a siege that takes place on Jerusalem. That siege is actually prophesied by the biblical narrative. If you've never seen Jeremiah 4, I want you to hear all of Jeremiah 4. All of Jeremiah 4 is very important because there's a prophecy in Daniel that I think is very important. I'm going to go to it real fast. Actually go to Daniel. So Daniel has a prophecy. We talk about it very often. And there's a word that many trip over. It's not really something to trip over. And it has to do with translation. Gotta be careful with translation. Now, let me show you something real fast, because a lot of times when you see a word, you gotta know how it's being used there, to get an understanding on what's being said. All right, so I don't know why this thing's not being hid. I don't know. I'll let that be. All right, so you can see right here, and from the King James Version, I trust the King James Version. The reason why, because I believe the translators they had way more translators. They did very well. This is what it reads: and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Now, you see where it says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, it's letting you know soon as the daily sacrifice is about to be taken away. Now, some trip up and they see different parts where, like, for example, these other translations, let's say right here, from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished. Okay, so I'm going to open up a paint tool. And why I want to open up this paint tool is because I think it's important to understand what's it saying. Paint tool. So this is very important. If we read the biblical narrative carefully, we got to understand what's it talking about, because some people will try to make this future, some people will try to make this past. This is actually talking about an event from the time, even if you read it like this, from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished. That means when it comes to pass, is abolished, and the abomination that caused desolation is set up. There shall be 1,290 days. So it lets you know from one event to another event is those days in between. Now let's just put that down. Let's just do something like that, and I'm gonna show you the difference between if it can be future and if it can be past. So I'm gonna put a timeline right here. It's gonna be a timeline, and I'm gonna put a time scale here. What we need to do is we need to get. I'm going to go back real fast and put something here. We need to get 1,290. Now, what's important about this prophecy, it's important to understand in prophecy, sometimes days can become years. So, for example, in this prophecy, this will be a day-to-year prophecy. Now, we can also turn it to a day prophecy, and we're going to look at that as well. We're going to look at both of those. We'll look at both of those and examine both of those. The reason why is because that's important for prophecy. All right, so let's say if we're going to look at this prophecy, the ancient daily sacrifice was important to understand. If we look at the details of this event, this event wasn't just a small event. The reason why it's getting that detailed when you see the scriptures start to talk about exact years is because it's major. It's actually a major event, and major things happen at this event. I'm going to see if I can move this thing or something. Maybe I can move it, put it down for there. All right. So you can see right here, watch what it says right here. It just talks about where all the goodly vessels was taken away. If you haven't seen, did a lot of videos on this event. I'm going to actually make an animation about the details of how this unfolded, right? He took away everything. He took away the priests. That's why I'm going to show you Jeremiah 4 to go over these things. But first, before I do that, let's just look at some hypotheticals. I'm just going to show you some hypotheticals. So I'm going to show you what we believe by the prophecy. 599 BC is a starting point. And then going 1,290 years, you're going to get to a certain point, which is going to be where you get the abomination of desolation set up. The time that that's set up is in 692. Now, what's important about that, it's not just pointing to the Dome of the Rock. It's not just pointing to the Kaaba. It's also pointing to the coin that was made in that time, a declaration of war made to Rome. In that time, that was the first Shahada coin ever made, and that was a declaration that they made to Rome that same year, 692 AD. 692 AD was a major year of the making of the Dome of the Rock, which is the abomination still in the land, and the Kaaba stone, which they circle around just like water. What's important to understand, if we take that time frame, just to show you that we can get that exact time frame in between, I'm going to put 692 and 599. And the month really doesn't matter, even though we can get the exact for the months and things like that. In fact, it kind of does. I'm going to get the exact. So remember the siege. What's important is the end of the siege actually happened in December. It's actually Chislev. It could be December, November. And then what's important is basically the Dome of the Rock, like we said, looking at the Dome of the Rock, the Kaaba stone, the declaration of those things, and the making of the coin, declaring war on the how you say, making war on Rome, right? That all happened in 692 AD. Now, what's important is, yes, there is going to be methods using the Islamic dating, but we also can use uh, Gregorian dating too. But both of the Gregorian dating, when compared, that's what this note is comparing those years. When compared, the Gregorian dating and the Islamic dating agree. They agree in time when you compare them. So I use two different tools after learning how to use their calendar to put the time frame. Basically, they say, I'm just gonna say it what it is. 72 AH is the same as 692 AD, which also we find in different historical writings that there was a siege at that time. And I think sieges really give you pinpoint understandings of events. Sieges give you very important pinpoints of events, because when people start dying, people start noting that. People start noting those type of events. So it was October 692. So let's just start from there, because after October, to note this siege, the siege that happened for 6 to 7 months after October. So we're talking November, December. So about same thing, Chislev. After October is when that started to happen. So just to make it understood, Chislev, November, December, that's going to be the time frame. So if we put right here, November, and we make this 692, make this one 599, and you can see here, if we calculate, then you're going to have exactly what the prophecy is pointing out, right? You can see 290 in between these two events. The reason why that's important is because what's going to be said in Jeremiah 4. So we're going to look at Jeremiah 4 to understand why this prophecy actually starts with 599 BC, the prophecy to Jehoiakim, and then Jehoiachin rebellion. That split moment in 599 BC is the time when Yah looked away from Jerusalem. That's going to be, in fact, that's a day of the Lord, an example of the day of the Lord. And I'm going to show you how we know that just from one verse, right? We know that that's the day of the Lord based on what the Lord says in what he says. In fact, I'll let it read through because it's a very deep and important read. It's a plea that the Lord makes to the people. In fact, I'll play it through this so you can see as we go over it. All right. I'll play it on this thing.
Return, O Israel, saith the Lord. Return unto me.
All right, this is gonna be Jeremiah 4.
Jeremiah 4. If thou wilt return, O Israel, saith the Lord, return unto me. And if thou wilt put away thine abominations out of my sight, then shalt thou not remove. And thou shalt swear, the Lord liveth in truth, in judgment, and in righteousness. And the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory. For thus saith the Lord to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground, and sow not among thorns. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord, and take away the foreskins of your heart, ye men of Judah, and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire, and burn that none can quench it. because of the evil of your doings. Declare ye in Judah, and publish in Jerusalem, and say, Blow ye the trumpet in the land, cry, gather together, and say, Assemble yourselves, and let us go into the defenced cities.
Now take note of what's happening here. He's declaring war, that war is going to come on them. The first siege began with Jehoiakim. Now remember, when Jehoiakim had opened the gates for Nebuchadnezzar, that was when the prophecy was handed to Jehoiakim. That was actually even a sign, because it was like basically just handing over the kingdom, being destroyed instantly. But pay attention to what he's addressing here. He's telling them to flee. You know who else said this? Messiah. Messiah had said this, speaking on the 70 weeks prophecy. He said to them, if only you knew the day of your visitation, right? Because we're going to look at that. It's called the day of the Lord. It's very important. Watch what happens here as we go over these things. That's why Messiah had warned them. He said the sign of Jonah, right? It wasn't going to be 40 days, because remember, after his resurrection, he stayed there for 40 days, but it was going to be 40 years. And the 70 AD events contest to itself. But let's keep on reading here, because this is very important. He's telling them to let us go into the defense city. It's saying leave. It's saying to leave Zion. That's what it's saying here.
Set up the standard toward Zion. Retire, stay not. For I will bring evil from the north and a great destruction. The lion is come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. He is gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate, and thy cities shall be laid waste without an inhabitant.
Now take note of what he's saying here. Who is the lion that he's speaking of here? And in Daniel's dream, remember, Nebuchadnezzar was a lion, considered as a lion with his wings plucked out, right? Babylon was considered as a lion with his wings plucked out. This is actually reflecting on Nebuchadnezzar, the destroyer of the Gentiles, is on his way. Remember, because he destroyed Egypt and other nations around. And what's important is the warning is that soon as he comes there, soon as he has to move, soon as he comes up there, it's over. He's saying that the Lord is going to turn his face away from them. How do we know that that's true? Because I also had a random note about sacrifices and everything. It's important to note, when does the Most High deny sacrifices? It's very important to understand, soon as he chooses to deny it, it doesn't matter if someone makes the sacrifice. He even had warned them different times. For example, Jeremiah 14:12. When they fast, I will not hear their cry. When they offer burnt offerings and an obligation, I will not accept them, but I will consume them by the sword and by the famine and by the pestilence. Now, if it says that when they make offerings and obligations, does that mean that the offerings and obligations are still there? Yes. He's saying when they make their offerings and obligations, he will not accept them. So when the siege had took place, he denied their offerings. That's important to understand. It's actually important. There's a scripture where he talks about he cut off 3 kings in 1 year. He's actually talking about the 3 kings that changed in 1 year. He's talking about Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah. That's very important. You can see also right here, he says, thus says the Lord, right, of hosts, God of Israel, right? Put your burnt offerings into your sacrifices and eat flesh. Do you know what he's saying when he says that? Put your burnt offerings into your sacrifices and eat flesh. He's basically saying what's the best way to put that as simple? It's basically, eat flesh is saying, it's an insult pretty much. It's saying I'm not happy. It's the best, easiest way to put that. For I spake not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings or sacrifices, right? But this thing he commanded them, saying, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and ye shall be my people, and walk ye in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well with you, right? Very important to understand what it's talking about there is letting us know that the Lord doesn't delight in sacrifices as much as obedience. So he denies the sacrifices, but it's important to continue on with what he's saying there. He's saying when Nebuchadnezzar is going to come there and besiege them, he denies their sacrifices right then and there. That's very important to understand. Let's continue.
For this gird you with sackcloth, lament and howl. For the fierce anger of the Lord is not turned back from us. And it shall come to pass at that day, saith the Lord, that the heart of the king shall perish, and the heart of the princes and the priests shall be astonished, and the prophets shall wonder.
Notice what he's saying there. It says it shall come to pass at that day. What day is he talking about? He's going to reference back to it. It's going to be a reference of the day of the Lord. Very important.
Then said I, Lord God, surely thou hast greatly deceived this people and Jerusalem, saying, Ye shall have peace, whereas the sword reacheth unto the soul. At that time shall it be said to this people and to Jerusalem, a dry wind of the high places in the wilderness toward the daughter of my people, not to fan, nor to cleanse, even a full wind from those places shall come into me. Now also will I give sentence against them. Behold, he shall come up as clouds, and his chariots shall be as a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe unto us, for we are spoiled.
Now, this is important. Notice what he's saying here. Notice what he's saying here. He's saying that when Nebuchadnezzar comes up, people will see it and say, woe unto us, for we are spoiled. Let them know that there's no hope. Don't pray to the Most High at that moment, because he's not going to accept it, because they didn't accept his words. That's very important. Remember, Jehoiakim, he tore up the papers and threw them in the fire. That's very important to understand. That he's saying when they was to see all these things, they should know that they are forsaken. That's what the warning was throughout Jeremiah. You get different sayings where he says, when you see these things, know that you are forsaken.
O Jerusalem, wash thine heart from wickedness, that thou mayest be saved. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee? For a voice declareth from Dan, and publisheth affliction from Mount Ephraim. Make ye mention to the nations, behold, publish against Jerusalem, that watchers come from a far country, and give out their voice against the cities of Judah. As keepers of a field, are they against her round about, because she hath been rebellious against me, saith the Lord? Thy way and thy doings have procured these things unto thee. This is thy wickedness, because it is bitter, because it reacheth unto thine heart. My bowels, I am pained in my very heart. My heart maketh a noise in me. I cannot hold my peace, because thou hast heard, O my soul, the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Destruction upon destruction is cried, for the whole land is spoiled. Suddenly are my tents spoiled, and my curtains in a moment. How long shall I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? For my people is foolish. They have not known me. They are sottish children, and they have none understanding. They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet will I not make a full end. For this shall the earth mourn, and the heavens above be black, because I have spoken it, I have purposed it, and will not repent, neither will I turn back from it. The whole city shall flee for the noise of the horsemen and bowmen. They shall go through thickets and climb up upon the rocks.
All right, pay attention. What did he just say there? You see what he just said there? They shall go into the thickets and climb into the rocks. Now, it's been a long time since we went to our Revelation note. Been a long time. And I hope, for those that have seen the Revelation note, have a good understanding of Revelation. We're going to get doing that. We're going to get back going on the Revelation note every Sabbath and just get an understanding of Revelation. We just had to, dive deep into some information for a while. But let's talk about something real fast. The day of the Lord. The day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is at hand. What's important about this is that this is going to be a very important connection of information that's going to give us understanding of what is the day of the Lord. Now, notice what he says here in the sixth seal of this event. Now, what's important to understand, the Most High is actually referring to an old event there. concerning Judah and Jerusalem. But this is going to be, as they say, a precept, something to look back to that has some type of order to the understanding of a thing. You can see right here where it says right here, this is what happened to them. You said the kings of the earth and everyone, right, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, right? And they said, fall on us, right? I'm going to go down to another one. You can see Messiah talks about that, where he says right here in different parts. Well, actually, this one for Messiah right here, where he talks about that, where he says, they'll say, fall on us, and to the hills cover us. You can see right here, the high places of a vain wickedness. The sin of Israel shall be destroyed. The thorn, the thistle shall come up on their altars. They shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. You can see what's going on there. Here's another one. Enter into the rock and hide you in the dust for the fear of the Lord, for the glory of his majesty. The lofty looks of men shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down. And the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be on every one that is proud and lofty, and every one that is lifted up, so that he shall be brought low. You can see what's going on there. So it's talking about basically how they say right here, they shall go into the thickets and climb into the rocks, right? And every city shall be forsaken, and not a man shall dwell therein. You can see what's going on there, how it's connecting with these things. Very, very important, but let's keep on reading to get an understanding what's going on here.
Every city shall be forsaken, and not a man dwell therein. And when thou art spoiled, what wilt thou do? Though thou clothest thyself with crimson, though thou deckest thee with ornaments of gold, though thou rentest thy face with painting, in vain shalt thou make thyself fair. Thy lovers will despise thee. They will seek thy life. For I have heard a voice as of a woman in travail, and the anguish as of her that bringeth forth her first child, the voice of the daughter of Zion that bewaileth herself, that spreadeth her hands, saying, Woe is me now, for my soul is wearied because of murderers.
All right, so you see how deep that was a prophecy that was said to them so that they would know and turn, so they would hear the Most High, in Judah, the man of Judah and Jerusalem, so that their selves would hear what he requested, so that he would have mercy in Jerusalem. That was very important because that was to Zion. Now, the reason why I say that is important is because the time that the Most High said that he was going to deny them was soon as he was going to deny them, soon as the lion was to rise out of his thicket. That was a very important to understand, that when he was declaring to Judah and published in Jerusalem, a very important message was that they needed to flee. They needed to go to the defense cities and leave that place. He said, set up the standard, retire, right? Retire, right? You retire, you don't stay there. Stay not, right? For I will bring evil from the north, right? Babylon above, right? That's what he was warning them, that when they got there, that's when they would be forsaken. All their sacrifices, all those things would not have been accepted, because it was being warned up to Jehoiakim. And the time that Jehoiakim died, Jehoiachin seen it. That's very important, that Jehoiachin seen his death. That's very important when we talk about that. Now, going back over to that note we was just doing right here. Now, the reason why I say this is important because looking at Daniel, right? Daniel 12. Now we're going to talk about some very interesting concepts. So what's interesting about this is that some individuals think that happened after the siege. They think that event, they think that the daily sacrifice, which was a lamb morning and evening, was taken away in 598 BC. Now that's not so, but let's just work with that. What would that change with the prophecy? Well, we can see right here, what it would do is move it up a year. But the thing about that, I'm going to show you something. The thing about that is that we're not looking at what history is saying. We got to look at what history is saying and the biblical narrative. He doesn't care about any of the instruments. He doesn't care about the instruments. He don't care about none of those things. He cares about the people. He cares about the prophecy and the time frame of the prophecy. The way it's declared is that when Nebuchadnezzar is to rise up and take away the sacrifice, that's going to take away the offering. Now, here's another chart. Let's say you thought this was a future event that would happen in the future. Well, what's important to understand is that in the future, there's a thing called a time times and half. After the time and a half, that's actually when everything's done. Before the time and a half, there's a 5-month period of darkness. It's very important to understand that no one can die in that time. And it's just a crazy time. Now, what's important to understand, time and a half, that's 3.5 years. So we can put right here, 3.5 years, right? So this would be 3.5 years. Now, let's say if you thought this was in the future. Now, what is important is that if you take those right there and consider and just consider what's the word I'm looking for? Consider, go back over here. Consider the start date. Let's say you thought the daily sacrifice was in the future. There's going to be a takeaway of a daily sacrifice. I don't know what someone would think it would be, but let's say they thought it was somewhere in the future, right? Let's say it was in the future. And how long would that event be based on the biblical narrative? What's important is that a time and a half biblically would actually be, let me actually show you something. Another note. In fact, I probably don't need to do that. Another note. But it's 42 months. Just know it's 42 months. That's also going to be exactly, if I'm right, 1,260 days. Now, for the time and a half, it's actually going to be 1,260 days. Now, what's important to understand about that, 100 and 260 days is exceeding this prophecy. It's exceeding this prophecy. Now, I'm talking about if we make this days, right? If we make this days, is more than this prophecy. Not only that, but after this event, it tells us on Daniel, this is what it tells us on this event, on the next part. On the next part of this event, we actually get the story where it tells us, blessed is he that waits and reaches the 1,335 days. Now, there's two ways people look at this. They'll just add, they just add a few days to 1,260, which I'm going to do real fast. They just basically, I'm going to show you real fast right here. So what they base, sometimes people do stuff like this. They'll just extend it out. So you see right here, if this is going to be the end point, if we're going to start here and it's going to go into 3.5 years, they add an extra 75 years at the end. And they'll say up to 1,335 days. Now, besides the confusion of that, I just want to clarify it. The time and a half is only 1,260 days. That's how long the time and a half. That's how long it says the beast reign, because there's a false idea of a 7-year tribulation. People fall into that. That's a mistake. Now, taking that into consideration, that's one way to look at it, and that's wrong. The reason why that's wrong is because that's exceeding this 1,335 days exceeds the time and a half. Now, what's important about that as well, some would do this, which is worse, where they'll take that 1,290 and then basically add on this, which makes it longer, makes it way longer. That's why this prophecy is actually going to be converted to years, not days. Because if you try to make it days and try to make it fit the time and a half scale, it's not going to work. Just not going to work. In fact, the prophecy is pointing to the daily sacrifice, a old sacrifice. That's what it's pointing to. That's why when you look at these words, you got to be careful, because words are important, but you got to be careful when you're reading the prophecies and the biblical narrative. It doesn't matter if it says shall be, right? For which the King James version, which is better, I believe, and I can actually show some information why I believe the King James Version, the translators of that more than other translations. But you can see right here where it says shall be taken away. And you can see right here some saying is abolished. It's talking about an event that when it comes to pass, once that daily sacrifice is taken away, that's going to be the start until the time of the abomination of desolation. That's very important. So from the daily sacrifice to the abomination of desolation, a more fit scale is finding when the daily sacrifice was taken away. 1,290 years. That 1,290 are not days, but years. This is a day-year prophecy. That will go all the way to the time when the Dome of the Rock was set up, the time when the Kaaba was set up, the time when they made a declaration of war to Rome. I had talked about this before when I talked about the information of the beast and everything. 692 AD, they did all that. That would actually take us up to 2027. That's very important. That's very, very important. Because if someone wanted to start a year later, that would take it to 2028, which prophecy, logically, I wouldn't agree because what the prophecy says is important to understand that even this year we would have what's the word I'm looking for? It will work because technically, if we look at the time when the Kaaba was actually designed and the Dome of the Rock and all that stuff, it was actually at the end of 692, going to 693. So you could have some finishing work in 693. But I would rather go with the historical documents where in 599 BC is when Jehoiakim was taken down and when Jehoiakim seen his father die and he also was besieged. And in his time of his besieging, it was done that same year. He was actually taken that same year, but he was replaced with a new king. Nebuchadnezzar waited to put a new king, Mattaniah, but changed his name to Zedekiah and put him on the throne in 598 at the new year, at the start of the new year, which is actually recorded at Nisan. That's when he set up the new king, at Nisan, which is the start of the new year, right? So at the start of spring, he set a new king because Jehoiachin, at the start of his year as Nisan, he became king, but he was taken shortly at the end of that year. And after his taking, Nebuchadnezzar waited until next year to set up Zedekiah, which originally Mattaniah, right? That's important to understand that in 599 BC, all those things came to pass. That's what's important. When you look at the historical documents, it's going to give you more pinpoint, and also the biblical narrative supports it. So that's why we looked at the comparison of the time to get those things into exact of those things, because it's very important. Now, the reason why I want to show you that is because I wanted to be open and fair, because sometimes you get individuals that combat words and things like that. For example, like Jose. In the Jose prophecy, there is a word there that some trip over. I'm going to show you real fast. Not Obadiah, but Jose. In fact, let me just see if it's on one of these notes here. Yeah. This is just some information where it says, "Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn and he will heal us. He has smitten and he will bind us up." That word where you see where it says bind, what's important about that real fast. I'm just going to go down here and just talk about it real fast. And go to that chapter 6, right here. So come, let us return to the Lord, for he has healed us, and he will, other places you'll see where it says he will bind up our wounds. So what's important is when you go to this information, make sure you're looking at all the information, because it has different meanings, but right on his page, you can see where it says definition to heal for the word, for the actual root of the word. And this one would be for heal. But there's also the word right here to bind up, right here. And this one also can sometimes be used for bandage or healer, things like that. For example, we can get verses with those examples when we go down. Make sure you see the whole thing of stuff. Bind up, namely a wound. Usually in figure, It's actually very important to understand when we're looking at these. We can compare it with different verses. For example, we can see this word used with Pharaoh's arm, Ezekiel 30 to 21. See right there. Just to look at that, just to read it a little bit. Right here it says, Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and lo, it shall not be bound up to be healed, right? Bound up to be healed, to put a roller to bind it, right? A roller to bind it in the system of healing it, to make it strong to hold the sword. Very important. So you can see we're going to be looking at that same word. So getting a little understanding right there. You can see using with that healing and then using with the binding, letting us know what it's talking about there. Context, pretext gives us a good understanding of those things. You can see it other places, Ezekiel. You can see right there. And this is just for the sake of clarity. You can see bound up and everything when it's using that same word. A lot of times you see it with that word in the phrase when it's talking about heal. And then you can see bound up right there when it's talking about that word, which, you know, you're getting that same word. So a lot of times you see those in connection. And this reads, this is what it reads. It just says this. It just talks about the disease have you not strengthened, neither have you healed that which was sick, neither have you bound up that which was broken. So you see, neither have ye brought again that which was driven away, neither have ye sought that which was lost, but with force and cruelty have you ruled them. So very important to understand that word can be used for heal, for the process of healing. It's very important. We see it in other different verses. One more, and we also can see in Isaiah. You know, it's not hard to understand prophecy. Words are not hard to understand. We can study the linguistics of words and get into the roots of different words. Yeah, that's different definitions of certain words. We got to know the context when certain things are there. But I just want to make that clear while going over that. That's just a little extra thing over some information. Now, going back into the prophecy, 599 BC is a not just biblical, it's very pinpoint accurate. It's a very pinpoint accurate time that you gotta look at historical books if you're going to talk about this time frame and the prophecies of this time frame. It's going to give a more accurate look. Avoid just typing something down on internet and just taking that as a historical reference. Rather look at the historical references, because even you got to compare them and cross-reference them to make sure that's what you're looking at. When you're looking at sieges and we are taking the biblical narrative and comparing the biblical narrative, you're going to get pinpoints. So that's what the prophecy is. The Daniel 12 prophecy is actually going to be 599 BC, going to 692, and then up to 2027. You're going to have from 599 BC to 692, 1,290 years between. And then from that point, you'll have 1,335 in between these events there. So just for clarity, that's why we go over prophecy. So I like to make time to look at these deeper things and stuff like that to get a good understanding of the prophecies and things like that. So that's one prophecy. And the Hosea 6 prophecy is a prophecy solid in his own. That's just a prophecy solid in his own. That also points to the same year, 2027. Not just that, but the Jubilee prophecy, which is a prophecy of his own as well. So the reason why I want to talk about this is because I think it's important. I think it's important if we look at these things carefully, when we examine the information. We gotta be careful on what we what's the word I'm looking for, on how we divide the lot. Right? We gotta be careful on how we divide the lot, because if someone doesn't believe the prophecies, that's okay. Right? Don't make it a big deal. Don't take it out on anyone else. And we prove all things, right? Despise not prophecy, prove all things, and hold fast to that which is true. I think that history and prophecy goes hand in hand. Is one of those things that you got to look at carefully. You got to go about very thoroughly. It's no problem if you want to just find a summary of a time frame, right? You just look it up on Google and find a summary on time frame. But when people are examining prophecy carefully, it's important to examine history also. So that's very important. to know. So I just made this live for the sake of going over some prophecy and answering some questions on some things and getting some pinpoint understanding on some things. So just to sum it up, if anyone has any questions, I'm also watching to make sure everyone's good. Shalom, shalom, family, beloved, beloved. Just for clarity, for the perfect understanding of this prophecy, what we're saying here is very complex. You can see the notes in the description, but I love the Bible. I love the truth. I love salvation. I love the truth. I love history. I love, I love it. I love how the Bible and history goes hand in hand perfectly. It fits like a glove. So the reason why I wanted to show you this is just to show you the pinpoint understanding and to give a summary of everything. So I'm going to give a summary. Now I'm going to give a summary of what we just learned, basically. Just a quick summary. So what we just learned, I'm just going to see if I can look. Sometimes I like to see a visual for a reference. Sometimes one of these have a decent summary or something on one of them. Maybe let me just see here. Maybe one of these have one for $5.99. Well, I'll just make a summary here. Here's a summary. In 599 BC, Jehoiakim, the father of Jehoiachin, these two reigned jointly. Both of them reigned jointly. In the same year, 599 BC, they were besieged. They were besieged in the same year when Jehoiakim was taken, which was earlier that year. Jehoiakim himself was taken in his 11th year, 599 BC, and then Jehoiachin, his son, right? Jehoiachin, his son, ruled in the place of Jehoiakim, his father. What's important about that is that in the same year, 599 BC, that's when we get the example of when Jehoiakim or Johanan or Johanan, or you say that. There's another way of saying Jehoiachin, the son of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim was taken 599 BC. Now the siege happened. The siege lasts for basically 3 months. But remember, Jehoiachin was set on the throne in Nisan, right? So calculate that. Nisan, that's spring, right? 3 months later, that's when the siege actually was it took place throughout the whole time, and then they say it came to end in 598. But Jehoiakim is actually recorded in other and especially when you see in Isaac Newton when he's recording what is actually talked about from other documents, other quotes, having the perfect calculation of the exact time frame. He knows that Jehoiachin was taken in 599 BC. And Zedekiah, is important to understand, he didn't go to the throne until Nisan, right? He didn't hit the throne until Nisan the next following year. Remember, Jehoiachin was made king Nisan the year before, in 599 BC. But Zedekiah was made king in 598 BC. So later that year, he became king. That's very important. So just for the sake of understanding, for the sake of clarity, we can calculate that just to have the full understanding. The best way is using the biblical narrative. It tells us that after Nebuchadnezzar died, if we go back 37 years, right? Because the scripture tells us itself that in the 37th year is when Jehoiachin was let free by Evil Murdoch, the beginning of Evil Murdoch's reign, 692, or not 692, 562 BC, 562 BC would be the time of Evil Murdoch's reign. We know without a doubt that 37 years going back from there is going to give us 599 BC. So just for the clarity, that's going to be the real understanding, is that 599 BC is the start of the time frame. If anyone goes against that, they might not know history as much as they think they know history. So it's very deep. It's very important, but we can always talk about these things carefully. And if they don't agree with it, that's all right. We don't bash any brothers just because they don't believe, but we do examine prophecy thoroughly. And if anyone wants to go over these things again, we always could. we can always go over these things very thoroughly, very carefully, to get an understanding of these things. So with that, family, I just wanted to have a holy conversation on these things and wanted to address the brothers that this is the direction we're going to be going, speaking prophecy, getting more deep into scriptures, because we got brothers and sisters, they need some meat and milk. They want to get back into some of the details of the scriptures. But that's why we use the scriptures when we were going over the details of life and stuff like that, the peoples of life and stuff like that. But these will be in the description. All these notes will be in the description. Obviously, there's more than I can go over, but there is definitely more information and certain pinpoints on events of time. So I just want to give you a summary of the events there. So with that, family, be blessed, be beloved, and amen.